everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live APAC on this International Women's Day. Before we get started, of course, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live, create, and learn on today, paying respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'm Johanna, here with the incredible, wonderful, magnanimous Sophie Elinor. How are you doing today, Sophie?
I'm doing very well. How about you, Johanna?
Doing pretty well. It's a good day.
Happy days.
Happy days. Now, it is International Women's Day, and we will be sort of sprinkling a little bit of that kind of thing throughout the stream. But we are, of course, here to learn how to animate in After Effects. Quick question. Do you want to do a little bit of a recap of what we did previous stream, or do you want to dive into what we're doing today right away?
Yeah, let's do a little recap, because we sort of we crawled to the finish line yesterday. We got.
I think we sprinted.
We sprinted, actually.
Line.
Yeah, you're right. It was all a blur. There's a scene missing in my mind. I'm not sure if it actually happened, but I did spend a few hours yesterday afternoon just kind of trying to finish off where we started, so I could sort of show you the end point of the process we were looking at yesterday. So yesterday was all about Photoshop frame by frame animation, and we got about half a second in worth of animation and our time ran out. But yeah, as I said, I spent a couple of hours yesterday afternoon just finishing it off, and I just thought I would show you as a starting point, I guess, for today, just so we can kind of compare and contrast once we jump into After Effects to sort of see the difference between the two. So this is our finished product from yesterday.
Amazing. I love the almost like felt tip marker texture that you've added to it.
Yeah. So this was, if I drop down, you can see there's quite a few more layers than when we started in yesterday's stream. And I've added this little kind of clipping mask on top just to bring that color out. But really, it was pretty much just continuing on with the same process we went through yesterday with, just drawing frame by frame, going back, coloring it in, and then doing a few refinements to just sort of finish it off. I've deliberately left it, a bit imperfect, just to sort of really lean into that, I guess, handcrafted, hand-drawn aesthetic. There's no need to sort of really up the polish on this style of thing, because you want it to look like it's been made by a human kind of thing. So yeah, that was our piece from yesterday.
Amazing. I do have just one last question before we move on, and I say hi to the chat and everything. Would you especially make sure to not worry about making it perfect, or not worry about the polish and details, because this will probably just be, not just be, but be an Instagram tile, something that you sort of share quick and easy on social media? Or is this also kind of the approach that you take sort of across your work as well?
It depends who it's for. I'm really okay with having a sort of imperfect finish. I think that in itself is a style. Doesn't need to be perfectly clean and polished and precise. And in fact, I've kind of had to unlearn that perfectionist side of me over the last few years, because I just sort of realized that the things that I was personally more drawn to had that look about them. I like things that are like a little bit wonky or a bit asymmetrical, or have, a bit of crunch in them, a bit of texture. If it was, the different context though, if it needed to be something that was also going to be, I don't know, say it's a logo that also needs to be embroidered, or on a screen printed shirt, or on a billboard or something, you might need to work with vectors. And I guess that probably leads us quite nicely into today's sort of stream, which is more about After Effects and beginning with vector artwork and kind of taking it from there.
What a fantastic segue that we did not plan at all. Truly.
Oh, you don't have your autoprompter running in the background there?
Exactly. That's why you see the blue light in my glasses.
Just lines going up.
I've been trying to sort of reduce it a little bit, but I think if I just lean back, you can't see how much of a fraud I am. No. While we change over to After Effects, I just wanted to say hi to the chat. Sorry about that. I got too excited. So hello chat. Welcome Alessandra and of course Flynn taking care of us as mod today. If you have any questions for us, feel free to post them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. And yeah, let's get ready and continue on with today's stream.
Yeah, let's do it. So just to kind of give you a little quick sort of, I guess, taste of the style of thing we'll be looking at today. I've got a couple of little animations I've done recently that use some of those techniques. This is very on theme for today, obviously being International Women's Day, but this is using a few different techniques, particularly path animation that we'll be using first of all in After Effects. But you'll also notice, even though I have done this in After Effects, I don't know if you can see it on this tiny screen here, but there is a little bit of texture, a little bit of roughness to the edges. I often find that even when I am working with vectors in After Effects, I still kind of crave that texture and just a bit of that handmade touch. So we're going to look at just sort of sprinkling that on top as a finishing touch when we get to the end of today's one. But yeah, we'll be looking at sort of morphing type, creating a bit of a loop where maybe the text changes. We're still working with our yeah, nah concept. So as we sort of talked about yesterday, the theme will be, you know, animating this one design in two different ways and then kind of stepping back and comparing the two. But it will also involve a little bit of stretching and morphing and that kind of thing.
Fantastic.
So that's where we're at. And if I jump back over into Illustrator, yesterday when we started, this was all one piece, but because we're going into After Effects, and I will actually be bringing these vectors with me, I've broken these letterforms up into individual pieces because I will be treating them separately in After Effects. So a little bit of, I guess, pre-production before we take it into After Effects, just sort of thinking about how I'm going to be animating this and how I can best set the file up to make it easier once I'm in there. So because I'm going to be doing a similar sort of thing to our Photoshop here, where we need to figure out a way to kind of morph that YE character set into an N. So yeah, I've broken that up into separate pieces here and I've got them on separate layers, trying to keep on top of things by labeling them with things that make sense to me. And I've also just kept in here my yeah and my nah template, just so I can sort of refer back to that once I'm in After Effects. So that's our little file set up there. It looks like a bit of a mess when you switch all of the layers on, but it will make sense once we get into After Effects. So why don't we just jump in there now?
Let's go.
So After Effects and Illustrator talk to each other really beautifully. They've brought in all of my layers separately. To do that, it's literally just file, import, file, and then we do kind of important to make sure you import as composition and to retain layer sizes. That just means everything will stay the same and it just slots it in, creates a composition for you, and you've got all of your layers, set out here. Now, I think the first thing we might do is we can switch off our yeah template underneath because I've actually already got those layers up here. And I might switch these off as well. But what I'll do is I'll keep my nah template on screen and similar to what I did in Photoshop, I'll just knock the opacity back a little bit just so it's there, but it's not the sort of primary focus. It's just in the background as a bit of a template that I can aim for.
And this would be more of a guideline and not necessarily an onion skin because it's the second component of the animation, right? Just so you get the placement and the layout the same, so it doesn't, you know, you've got the yeah here and the nah here, basically.
Exactly. And I might also just lock that layer so I don't accidentally move it. So just pressing that little lock icon there, and now it's sort of stuck in place. Now, yesterday we started with the tricky part, the Y and the E, because that was going to be our really dramatic movement. I think we might flip it today and start with our A and our H, because that's going to show you some really simple path animation. That's a super versatile technique that you can use in any sort of like illustration or type-based animation. If you've never been in After Effects before, I know it can be kind of an intimidating program to jump into.
Oh, yes.
It's a super powerful program. I guess the same with Photoshop and Illustrator. Probably most people, myself included, know like 2% of it, and you just sort of operate in your little realm, and every now and then you'll venture out and be like, oh, a new thing. So yeah, if you're new, the layers are just going to jump down here in your timeline sort of area, and these little arrows, you drop down here. After Effects will automatically kind of assign these different properties that you can then play with to each of your layers. There's also contents here, and this is the section that we're going to be sort of diving into here. We at this point don't really need to play with any of these things. What I want to focus on is the path. And by that, it's the lines and the anchor points. So you can see we can kind of grab individual points and move them around. They don't have to stay as corners either. You could transform those if you wanted to using the convert tool. So you can convert your corners into curves. That's not what we're going to be doing today. Sorry, I'm getting distracted.
It's all good.
But the first thing that I want to do is I want to basically want to stretch my H out a little bit, because at the moment in the yeah sort of formation, it's a lot narrower than it needs to be than the nah version. This sounds like gibberish when I'm saying it out loud. I hope it makes sense coming through.
No, yeah.
No, yeah? Okay, good. Excellent. So what we want to do, first of all, is just drop a keyframe or press on this little clock icon here. That's going to drop a keyframe on our timeline. And I just want to lock it in place where all of the path kind of anchor points are currently sitting. And then I'm going to jump forward, and I'm going to go and highlight just the anchor points on this side. And actually I might turn the A off so I can see the edge of my H properly. And just sort of holding shift, I'm just going to slide the anchor points across. And you'll notice that when I did that, I didn't have to press the clock icon again. It's just automatically dropped another keyframe because the path has changed and the timeline scrubber's in a different spot.
Right.
And so now we've got, without having done very much work at all, we've got our H stretching into formation, which is great.
Fantastic.
That probably would have taken us 15 minutes in Photoshop. So yeah, it's a lot faster and a lot more accurate, which has its pros and cons. And I guess we'll chat about that as we go along. So we've got our H kind of sitting in place there. And now I might go ahead and do the same for the A. So I'm just gonna put our A back on and maybe switch off these E layers just again so I can see what's underneath there. And we're looking for the path property. So to get to that, it's in contents, group, and then we've actually got two paths here because we've got our inside path here
and the
outside path. So a little bit trickier, but really pretty much the same process. It's just we're going to drop two keyframes instead of one. Mm-hmm. So for the moment, I'm just going to have all the movement happen at once, and we will go back and refine the order in which those things happen. I'm just sort of blocking out my movement at this point. So over the same sort of starting point where we began the H, I'll just lock in the current position and then move forward to that same spot on the time frame. Actually, another thing that we'll do here, you can see that if we have a look at the H, the right-hand side of it actually stays in position because it's right on the edge of the artwork. Mm-hmm. But the A is also, like if I pick it up and move it, it's still not wide enough. So we're going to have to both stretch it and move the position. So a couple of things that we want to do here. I'm going to, because we're only moving in one direction, the position property by default has an X and Y axis, but you can separate them out. So you're just moving one axis, which is you just sort of right click and go separate dimensions. And now we can just adjust it along the X axis.
Nice.
So,
and that just sort of helps you keep it in place and not worry that you might bump it up and, you know, make it a diagonal move, and just makes it easier, less chance of human error.
Yeah, it also, when you're adding ease to the keyframes later, just makes that a little bit smoother as well. Yeah, so we will, again, in that same starting spot that we had, which is kind of an arbitrary position, we can move these keyframes around later. I just happen to have my keyframe at 20 frames here, so we'll just go with that. I'm going to drop a keyframe on the X axis here, and then we'll jump forward to our same spot. And the first thing I'm going to do is move the position. Again, I'm just holding shift so that only my I'm only moving along that X axis. And then clicking on our path property, just holding shift to select the relevant keyframes and moving those along. Now this is, again, a little bit more tricky because we're working in two separate pieces. So there's a little bit more sort of manual adjustment involved than what we had with, with the previous one.
And the trickiness too of, you know, moving the points equal distance and sort of accurate enough that you don't change the balance of the letter form too much.
Yeah, which is why having that sort of template underneath is really handy.
Absolutely.
Because you're not having to sort of eyeball it. You've already figured it out in Illustrator. So that's looking pretty good, I think. Let me just lower the opacity here to check that I'm sort of in line. Maybe we'll zoom in a little. I think maybe this point here needs to come across a bit, just a smidge.
And would you even consider, you know, as well as lowering the opacity, having the sort of the template background letters in a different color to make them even easier to distinguish?
That probably would have been a smart thing to do.
I mean, there's so many ways to do things, but this is just me thinking that this is
no, you're absolutely
doing design
right.
on hard mode.
Yep, that definitely would have been a helpful thing to do. So yeah, you can do that if you like, but yeah, so already we've got like a nice sort of bit of movement happening here. This is without any ease, without any sort of layering of movement. So it will get a lot better, I'm hoping. once we tinker with it. So we've done our A and our H. Let's switch those E layers back on. And now this is the slightly more complicated part, because we're not just moving the position or the anchor points, we're kind of morphing between letters here. So we've got a few different pieces to play with. This sort of vertical stroke of the E makes sense to me to just nudge it across there, similar to what we did in the Photoshop one. That's an easy sort of thing. These crossbars we're going to have to get rid of. And I think what we might do is just sort of disappear them away into the spine of the E.
Yeah, that works.
I think this diagonal, what are we going to do here? I think we need to get rid of that altogether. And we might need to introduce a new piece for that diagonal of the N. So a few different moving parts here. Let's maybe start with the easy ones, which will be the E.
Let's do it. And before we get on to working on the second part, I do have a question. I want to make sure that I get this in before we get too technical. From Alessandra, is there a phrase or pun or funny sentence that you want to work on but have not had time to do it yet?
Oh. Let me just get my phone out and read you the entire notes app. I have so many.
Incredible.
Yeah, my entire notes app is basically just incoherent gibberish where I've gone, oh, that'll be like a silly pun, and I'll look at it 3 days later and go, what are you talking about?
Incredible. One day we might get an insight into that notes app, but for now it is sacred treasure. It's like the secret family recipe.
Does everyone else do that? Is everyone else like a notes app?
Oh, me, absolutely. I love, because my mind just goes very many different places very quickly. And if I'm lucky, I've written it down somewhere. And I love looking back after I've accumulated, trillions of small pieces of paper, and just rereading them and trying to understand what in the world I was thinking. And sometimes I think I misinterpret it and believe it's just a completely different idea, which sometimes is better than the original. But I know at least once or twice my new interpretation of what I've scribbled down which is very difficult to even read sometimes, is just, it's not the same, but it's a thought that counts.
Yeah. And sometimes, I'll often have the thing too where I think I'm having like a brilliant brand new idea, and I'll go to write it in my phone, and I've got 2 other versions of the same thing already written down from 3 years ago or something. Like,
isn't that
real
just proof that it is a really good idea, that you've remembered it more than once?
Sure. Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll answer them as we go along. But let's dive into the yay. It's time.
We're working on yay. So what I'm doing at the moment is just looking at the crossbars of each of these 3 crossbars on the letter E. And have I already done all 3? No, one's missing. This guy. Still using the path property here, but instead of widening or just sort of moving it, what I'm doing is kind of smushing it into nothing. I'm just reducing it into...
Squishing it back into place.
Yeah, we're smushing it, we're hiding it in the spine of that E. I don't really need to do this extra step of adjusting the opacity. I'm kind of just doing it because, I don't know, it satisfies me to do it properly. So what I'm doing here is, not that one. What I'm doing here is making the opacity of, if I switch, so you can see what I'm doing, if I switch that spine off, even though I've kind of smushed it all the way down to nothing, there's still just a tiny sliver sitting there, and I just don't want there to be any sort of random pixels that accidentally get seen when they're not supposed to. So just as kind of backup for myself, I'm also going to completely turn the opacity down, and maybe just give it 3 keyframes to do that, so we're not sort of
not at risk of it showing up.
Yeah. And I've just done that on all 3 of those crossbars. So if I switch this layer back on and we have a look at what's going on there. So we've disappeared our crossbars. So we're getting close to an N. We are ramping up in difficulty level here because now we've got something slightly trickier to do. Well, maybe not that hard. Let's just plow ahead and see how we go. So this vertical stroke of the Y needs to just shift position a tiny bit. It's not got very far to go, but again, we'll just do that separate dimensions and just do it on the X axis. Just nudge it across a tiny bit. So we are in position. And this guy, we might do something slightly trickier with. We might do a similar thing to how we did this in Photoshop, where it just kind of straightens up and joins that vertical stroke. Again, that's something that would have it's maybe 4 or 5 frames hand drawn there. we can do it in a couple of keyframes over here. So again, we're just sort of twirling down into this path property. And let's drop our first keyframe at the start, jump ahead.
It seems to me so far that the key differences, haha, get the pun, keyframes, wow,
She's on fire.
between Photoshop and After Effects animation is, Photoshop to me seems very much, you do one layer, completing sort of all the different components, and then you redraw everything again and again, whereas After Effects is
very
a bit more iterative. And sort of in different sections, you can really break things down to, okay, I'm going to do the top part of this letter and then I'm going to do the bottom part. Whereas with Photoshop, again, it's like, okay, here's everything done one way, and then we just do that again and again and again, exactly the same, but like slightly pixel difference.
Yeah, that's it. And while there is a lot of overlap, I guess, in the sort of principles of what you're doing, the order in which you do them and which you have to sort of think about them is kind of the opposite in a lot of ways. So in Photoshop, when we were talking about ease and sort of starting your first couple of frames close together and then speeding them up, you have to think about that right up front. Whereas in After Effects, you can be really messy with your movement up front. You're just like, okay, I'm just going to bash this out and see, you know, I just want to lock the movement in and then go back and refine and move your keyframes around. But for sure, working across both, sort of, they feed into each other, definitely.
Yeah. As the old adage is, ¿por qué no los dos? Why not both?
We love a hard shell taco, we love a soft shell taco.
Yep. You got it.
So we've got our diagonal moving nicely across here. And now we want to get rid of this pesky guy over here, this the right hand of the Y. And I think what we might do is we might, there's a couple of ways I could do this. I could, if I wanted to, sort of rotate it around and have it extend down into that position. But I think it would be nice if the movement, because we're sort of, we've got this left hand arm heading in the right direction, I think it would be nice to have that movement follow through and then have that diagonal sort of start once that arm's moved up there.
Yeah.
So I think what I want to do is disappear this down here, and then I will have the diagonal kind of grow from the top. So in order to do that, basically what I want to happen is for this guy to just slide down here. I could have the opacity change as it goes, but we're going to see all of this kind of this janky corner sticking out here, which I don't really want. It's not terribly elegant. So instead, I think what we'll do is we might add a little mask in here. So I'm just going to add a new shape layer. And with my little rectangle tool selected up here, I'm just going to roughly kind of position it. We can adjust this later on if need be. Doesn't really matter. It's just kind of a rough sort of position that we're going for. And I might also just rename this so I know what I'm looking at later on. We don't need a stroke on there, so let's just switch that off. And this is a fairly new-ish addition to After Effects. Like there's always been masking available in there, but I think the way that it functions has changed in one of the recent updates. Right. And I think it's made it, for me at least anyway, a bit more intuitive and a bit easier to sort of get my head around. So what layer is this? This is our Y3 layer. And what I want to do is I want to tell this layer to mask behind this shape. And the way that I do that is I take this little pick whip here, this little spiral icon. I feel so fancy doing this. I feel like a legit grown-up professional animator when I take my little pick whip up here and drag it onto my mask. It looks like I've done the exact opposite of what I wanted to do, but all we have to do is actually invert our mask here.
There we go.
So what that's done is it's called parenting, I guess. It's parented this layer to this mask up here. And I think the thing that's sort of new about this is that it doesn't matter the order that your layers are sitting in. I can move this mask around to wherever, and it's not going to affect the way that those layers interact with each other, because I've already sort of said, you know, no matter where you are in the order of layers, this is your parent layer. And the other really nice
very
thing,
sweet.
yeah, wherever you are, I'll be with you. It is very sentimental, isn't it? Man, After Effects getting us with the family ties there.
Yeah, look at us anthropomorphizing After Effects. Wow.
The other thing that I think is new about this is that you can also parent multiple layers to that same mask, which is cool, and maybe something we'll use a bit later on, but let's just see. So now that we have done that, so it automatically switches the mask layer off when you turn it into a mask. But what that means is now when I move this layer down, we're not seeing
trick.
Yeah, we're not seeing anything there, so it's just going to hide that for us. So in this instance, I don't want it to move straight down. That's going to look weird. I actually want it to move in that diagonal and kind of look like it's going in that same direction. So we do actually need both X and Y axis to do that. So I'm not going to separate dimensions in the same way that I did for the others. We're going to keep the positions with the X and Y locked. Drop that keyframe there. And we'll just kind of, and again, we can adjust this later if we don't get the angle quite right. But it's just going to sort of slide down there and then disappear out of view.
Truly like magic to me.
Yeah.
As someone who is more of the frame by frame animation scene, this to me is just, it's a whole new world.
But it's really straightforward, right? Like none of this is terribly complex. You're using all of the properties that are already assigned to things. It's just, breaking it down a little bit. But you're right, it is magic. I still get excited every time I do the most basic of illustrations or animations. I'm like, look at it go.
And that's so what exciting. You want, I think. That's one of the joys of making stuff, really. But speaking of making and learning, great segue. Where did you learn After Effects?
I'm mostly self-taught. Really, like my very first sort of thing that I started working on was through a friend of mine who was doing a lot of 2D animation at his work. And I kind of looked at it for so many years and just felt like it was just unapproachable, totally overwhelming. I didn't know what the entryway was. I'm like, I'm too old. I can't learn a new thing anymore. But yeah, my friend Michael sat down with me and was like, well, look, what's a thing you want to make? And I came up with a little design. It was just a bit of lettering with like just sort of cursive stroke kind of thing. And he showed me the trim path tool, which is something that we've talked about a lot in previous sessions. Still one of my favorite tools to play with. And yeah, from there, it was really just, very motivating to have just a couple of little tools that I could play with, that I could do so many different things with. There's so many different applications of just these really basic kind of techniques, depending on if you're coming at it from like a type perspective or an illustration perspective, maybe doing logos. Like these techniques work for all of those things, and they're just like the basic sort of entry level things. Like then when you start adding other more fancy kind of
just
techniques and effects,
build on that initial knowledge.
And it's really exciting, like to be able to take a static design and even just add a little bit of movement. I don't know, maybe I'm showing a bit of naivety here, but it's still really, which
I think is very good. I think naivety is underrated. I think I'm using that word right. People should be more naive. As a very naive person, but I think just to maintain the wonder around what you do is very important. Because then there's always something new to do. There's always, I feel like if you're naive, any problem is solvable, which to almost that extent it is true. You can solve pretty much any problem. At least any problem in After Effects. But I think it's great.
I think that probably is like a broader philosophy in like sort of design and creativity in general. Is just you kind of have to be a little bit clueless, or not clueless, but you like
just open.
If you
I
really
think.
knew how difficult and how much work everything was, you probably wouldn't do anything. And
Too
so
hard
kind of going into it with I'm just going to make this little thing here and see where it goes is a much more manageable and I think a more exciting sort of way to go about it, because you everything is building on it. You're not just facing this enormous wall. You're just you're holding one brick and you're just building something like a little step at a time.
That is incredible. I will, because now I think we have a perfect segue on our hands, but I will just check in with you. We have about 20 minutes left. How much more time do you think we might spend on finishing? Is it this off? Because we do have some more things that we want to discuss, but I want to make sure that we put the work first. Let's
get this crossbar happening, and we might play with a bit of ease and some effects, and I think we'll be good. I might not do we might just go into na. We might not have time to do na back into but I think it'll be similar techniques anyway, so I think that'll be fantastic. That'll be a good starting point. So we've cleared the space now for our hero diagonal to take center stage. So I've actually got that as a separate piece. Where are you? Down here somewhere? This guy. So I'll switch him on. Again, we're going to play with the path. I'm going to jump forward in time a little bit here because we probably don't want it to be finished just yet. So I'll lock in. Where did we go? I'll drop that keyframe in there and then we'll come backwards. And we might just... we could do this another way too. That's something else that I'm learning a lot in After Effects, and I guess just sort of Adobe software in general, is that on any given project, there's usually about half a dozen different ways to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
And it's really just like personal preference, what feels comfy,
what you have time for in terms of deadline.
Now, I'm not sure how this is going to play. It's a little bit, we've got a bit of side to side movement there. I might just, and I'm also noticing, I don't know if you can see that, there is a tiny little pixel imperfection here. We've got a little corner here.
It is. I didn't want to say it because
I saw it before and I was like, we'll come back to that. Let's fix that up now while we're here.
Amazing. So and while you're fixing that up, I will just say massive compliments in the chat. Both Nick and Alessandra love the color palette, love the concept. Carpet in the background, stunning. And commenting on how it all kind of matches. I don't know if that was intentional with the yellow and the pink, but we see it and we very much appreciate it.
It didn't occur to me until when we were halfway through yesterday's stream that I had matched the design that we're working on to the artwork in the background.
That's when you truly know, like, the artist and the art is one.
Yeah, well, this is actually a piece by an artist in the States whose work I really love. She's called Peach Things, and she does beautiful, beautiful tufted art. And this is her wiggle rug, and I've never seen anything like it before. And I just love it so much.
Amazing. I'm going to bring that link up in the chat while you move those pixels.
So that's looking a little bit better. But we might also we've got a similar issue here where even when I've sort of, similar to the crossbars of the E, where I've sort of shrunk them manually, there's still a tiny sliver that's visible underneath, and you can really see it when that sort of moves up here. So really easy fix. We will just once again bring this opacity down, and we actually don't want to see that until a couple frames in.
Fantastic. And we have comments from Melisandre in the chat as well that yes, they usually happen to match their artwork in the end as well, which
the amount of times I get dressed in the morning and I realize that I'm just wearing something that I drew the night before or something. Like, yeah, it's...
Well, actually, I was curious because I absolutely adore your sensibility of color and combining different colors. Every time I know your stream is coming up, I can't, even if I'm not hosting, I'll think, okay, I need to wear something colorful for Sophie because she does it so well, and I just want to be as bright and beautiful as her. Would you say that your personal wardrobe, I mean, directly influences the colors that you use in your work, or is it that the colors that you use in your work influence what you have in your wardrobe?
Yeah, it was actually the opposite, which is kind of funny because for quite a few years, a bit earlier in my career, I would still do really colorful artwork, but I felt like I dressed much more muted. And I sort of had like a bit of an epiphany kind of moment. And the same with my house. Like I would decorate my house in very, like, I thought everything had to be all white and like neutrals because that was very much a thing.
Yeah.
And I just sort of, I was like, well, I do this in my work all the time. Why aren't I doing this elsewhere? Why is not everything colorful? Why shouldn't it be? And it's been, yeah, a sort of slow process over the years, just kind of, yeah, anytime I needed something new or was like looking around for things, to be like, no, I'm going to go for the really bright, intensely saturated option.
You're much braver than me. As we can clearly see by black t-shirt with a little bit of yellow.
Yeah, you got that colourful background going on.
Small steps for me. I think every designer starts out being very much comfortable in all black. And then I think it's as we mature as a industry species, we then develop more colors as we go.
I think it's also just realizing that, like, who cares, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, you sort of feel like there's this standard that you have to subscribe to or whatever, and it just doesn't matter. I will often get a little bit self-conscious before I walk out the door because I'll be wearing like bright blue boots and yellow pants and a like fluorescent pink jumper or something, and I'll kind of go, I do look a bit like a clown today, but also I feel like me and it makes me happy. And you know, more often than not, it will often just like bring a smile to someone else as well. They'll just be like, huh, look at that crazy person over there.
Honestly,
they're in their own world.
It's inspirational. It's, you know, you see someone that's just living their life, doing their own thing, and I think, or at least the naive optimist in me would like to think that if I saw someone wearing something very colorful walking down the street, I would maybe consider wearing colorful socks the next day. You know, like it's small steps, but it makes a difference.
Yeah, whenever I see someone in a really fun outfit, I'm like, yeah, I love that. Like, that's so much fun. But yeah, it is a bit of a process. You kind of do have to get into the mindset of it. Now, I've got a few little kind of quirks and kinks here that I need to work out, but in the spirit of just kind of getting something done on the table, I'm just going to highlight all of my keyframes, because at the moment we have kind of got a semi sort of finished concept here. We've got going into now. I'm highlighting all my keyframes, which at the moment have no ease on them at all, and I'm just right clicking keyframe assistant and adding easy ease. And actually, before I do that, let's just have a look at how that movement is going. It's very steady, it's very straight, it's fine. But when we add that ease, it just makes a big difference.
Oh, I see what you did there. That's nice.
Now, the other thing that you will notice is that everything is happening at the exact same speed at the exact same time. And it's quite boring. So we can move those keyframes around and offset them and maybe have some things happening a bit faster. Like, for example, the crossbars of the E. Before I do anything, let me just make this. This is a keyboard shortcut that I learned recently that absolutely blew my mind. If you highlight all your layers and press the letter U, it will collapse it so that only the keyframes that you have placed on there are visible, which just makes your video timeline a lot more manageable to scroll through. Oops, I didn't highlight that one. Let's do that. With that in mind, I think the first thing that I want to happen is for this Y to move down. So I'm actually going to move those keyframes forward and maybe even speed it up a little bit.
And speeding up, you're just doing that by moving the keyframes closer.
I'm just tightening the space between them. Yeah. While that is happening, we've also got a bit of an issue here, which I'll come back to later and fix. I think the next thing we want to happen is for this part of the Y to kind of straighten up once that goes. And then we want this to happen pretty quickly too, and fairly seamlessly. We want that vertical of the Y to just kind of shuffle across pretty quickly.
Nice.
Then once that's happening, the next thing, probably as soon as this diagonal hits the top here, is probably when we want to start that diagonal kind of coming down. So we might come down here and bring this forward and maybe tighten that a little bit as well. Maybe even faster. I feel like we could speed this up a fair bit. And that can happen sooner, I think. Yeah, that looks a little better to me. I think we've also got a bit of a gap up here, which we can resolve a bit later. Then let's offset these E strokes coming across because that will add a bit of interest as well. So we've got these 3 layers here, which we can tighten up a bit. They don't need to be going for that long. And we might just maybe put 3 frames between each of these. Let's see what that looks like.
I imagine that this process is kind of really where most of the time gets spent.
That's it, exactly.
Just where the most sort of trial and error of like, try this, then undo it. Because you can do that so quickly. If you change your mind and just move it 1 keyframe to the left, 1 keyframe to the right.
Yeah, that's totally it. And this is where you sort of spend the most time, as you say, in After Effects. And it's where I will watch the same thing a million times over and then maybe just leave it and come back to it with fresh eyes and go, is that working? Is that not working? This is kind of nice because what it looks like is happening is this sort of bottom foot of the A is kind of pushing this E. And I quite like that's
nudging it over.
Yeah. I think that's working really well. And we might just bring this H across a little so it can be the sort of last movement, as in it's being sort of pulled by that, the A coming across. So that's like a pretty decent sort of first pass at this. Yeah. Let's switch off this layer. So we're just looking at our artwork, and we might bring our little work area in a bit.
That is very nice.
So I think we might leave it there for keyframes and things. Again, like I said, I can notice a few little sort of issues that I need to go back and tinker with, but for the most part, I'm happy with that sort of movement. The thing that I'm kind of keen to show you is what we talked about up front, where we're just trying to add a little bit of that texture back into the artwork, just because it's, I don't know, I find while, you know, perfect vectors are lovely and clean, they also feel a bit clinical to me, and I just want to roughen it up. I just want to, like, you know, mess a tear up a bit and make it feel like it's, you know, seen some things.
Just give it a bit more character, for sure.
Yeah, give it some life experience, you know.
Yeah, you know, go on a, what are they called? Road trip. That's not what it's called. But backpacking. Yes, this year has gone for a backpack through Europe, for sure.
So there's again, like I said, there's like 4 or 5 different ways to do the same thing in After Effects. One quick way to just kind of roughen things up a little bit is to apply this sort of roughen edges effect. If I sort of zoom in here, you can kind of see already that it's
nice, yeah,
that it's like bowed the edges of that a little bit, and you can kind of play with these settings and you know, get some different effects with that. If I click off that, you can kind of see the difference there between
absolutely
this very clean edge. It almost has like a torn paper sort of effect.
Yeah, and would you be able to animate this as well, so you kind of have it being
absolutely
redrawn?
Yeah, you totally can. So the way you would do that is in the evolution options, there's this property here called random seed, and if I zoom back in, you can see when you change the number of that, it's basically just picking different points to apply the effect to. And so you can keyframe that. You could say, yeah, have it at 0 here, and then have it at something else here, and it'll just sort of animate between that. Or you can get extra fancy. If you hold Option while you click on this little time frame, it'll open up the expressions area of the property. And this is like the one expression that I've learned recently that, again, makes me just feel like the world's most fancy sort of animator. What that is telling it, this time asterisk 12 expression is basically just telling it every 12 frames, pick a different number in the random seed. And that's just gonna, like, for however long your timeline is, it's just going to keep doing that forever. However, that is only applying to one single layer. You can then sort of copy that effect and paste it onto all your other layers, and if you wanted to, you could manually adjust the amount or all of these different properties here so that you got different sort of slightly different effects on each of your letters. The other thing you can do, though, is I'll just delete that.
Before you go into that, sadly, I've been incredibly indulgent asking all these questions. We do only have about 2 minutes left. I am so sorry. So,
all right.
Is there anything that you absolutely must show us? And then I do just want to acknowledge the sentence for International Women's Day, if we can, at the end.
Yeah, sure. I wonder if we have time to do this adjustment layer. Let me show you very, very quickly. So an adjustment layer is basically something you place on top and it affects everything underneath. What I want to do here is add, where are we? Distort and turbulent displace. And that looks like it's done a really weird, wacky kind of thing here. But basically, again, we can adjust the amount to something that is a little bit more manageable. You can play around with those settings, but that has universally affected the entire sort of composition. And again, if we go into our, where are we? Into our evolution options, we've got that random seed property again. So we can apply the exact same expression, and that is just going to give that little bit of kind of crinkle edge to the whole composition, which kind of feels more handmade automatically. If I switch that off, you can, maybe if I zoom in a little bit, you can tell a little bit more what's going on there. But
fantastic.
Just making a big difference to the overall composition.
Incredible. Now, sadly, that is all we have time for today. Before we end and before I do the thank yous, I just want to say happy International Women's Day to everyone. And the theme of this year's Embrace Equity, and a bit of homework for everyone. Sophie has done a great post about a piece of animation that we showed at the beginning about equity. And so I encourage you all to check it out and keep the conversation around equity going. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us these 2 streams. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope we can get you back again soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Our absolute pleasure. Have a great day, everyone. And we'll see you for more streams next week. Bye.
Bye.